Hello YouTube, Dave here again. One of my favorite channels on YouTube is the channel Metal Jesus Rocks. He's a video game collector, but he's got a lot of really cool videos, a lot of great collection videos. But one of the series that he has on his channel that I really enjoy the most is his buyer's guides to like the various consoles and handhelds and things along those lines. And it actually kind of inspired me to do something similar for Dungeons & Dragons. So, for example, with D&D 5th edition having been released and being quite popular, I suspect there are some people out there who want to go back and try out previous versions of the game. I've seen people post as such on Facebook groups and in other various places that I kind of follow some D&D themed stuff. So, with that in mind, I thought I would go through and give buyer's guides for all the editions and versions of Dungeons & Dragons. From the original OD&D up until the current 5th edition. So this video, number 1 here, volume 1 of this probably 4-part series, is going to focus on OD&D, so the original Dungeons & Dragons, the Menser D&D, D&D 1st edition, or AD&D 1st edition I should say, and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. Now with this series I actually have to break my cardinal rule, which is that I never really talk much about books that I don't own. So there's going to be things mentioned that unfortunately I don't have in my collection. Some of these things are books that I'd like to get. Other ones are ones that I'm totally okay with not owning. But again, I just want to have something set up for people that might be interested in going back through Dungeons & Dragons history. I know before moving from my regular gaming group to move to a different place to be with my fiance, we were actually in the process of playing through all the current editions of Dungeons & Dragons that had been out at the time, with the exception of 0 edition. So we had played 3.5, we actually played a little bit of Pathfinder as well, 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, a friend of mine ran 1st edition AD&D, and I was in the process of preparing a 2nd edition AD&D game, and I think a friend of mine after that was actually considering doing a basic, or the Menser Dungeons & Dragons. So if there's other groups out there that are interested in kind of going through this sort of thing, or if you're interested in a particular edition that you want to buy stuff for the purposes of running games, then hopefully you'll find this video series informative. Now this isn't going to be a video that details everything that's come out for those versions of the game, and I'm not going to focus on things that are considered rare or valuable, but may not be used. For example, when I discuss 1st edition AD&D, I'm not really going to mention the Deities and Demigods book, because that's not something that's really essential to just picking up and playing the game. This is what this video series is about, picking up and playing the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons. So hopefully you guys enjoy, and we'll start off with 0 edition. Alright, so here we have original Dungeons & Dragons, D&D 0 edition. This is the first version of the game that ever come out, and it was initially released back in 1974. For anyone looking to go back and play Dungeons & Dragons 0 edition, even though this isn't a collection video, I will say that this is technically one of the easiest editions or versions of the game to get a full set of. And the reason that I say that has to do with the fact that there's not very many books that actually go with it. In fact, this is the full run of the 0 edition books. You've got the first 3 that came in the original box set, and then you have 4 supplements. Now, it is worth mentioning, although it's not pertinent to this video, that there was another booklet that came out called Swords and Spells. This was a new set of miniatures rules that replaced the previous version, and it can be used with Dungeons & Dragons if you wanted to do something like a large-scale combat, but this really isn't important to the purpose of this video, so we're just going to set that aside. This is all about what do you need to actually play the game. The only reason I'm actually showing everything is because there are so few books. But the things that are really essential to running the game would be getting a copy of the reference sheets, a copy of the chainmail rules for medieval miniatures, because the combat system in this book are the same combat rules that are used in the Dungeons & Dragons game. The reference sheets do have a few of the charts, but I don't think it goes into the information that you would want. Now, as far as the three main booklets, these came in the original box set along with the reference sheets. The box itself is, a lot of times you hear the original white box. There was also a box that had like a wood grain pattern to it. Now, if you're looking to just play the game, I highly recommend avoiding buying the complete box set because the price is astronomical, going well over $1,000 even for some of the worst looking boxes. So this video is just all about just wanting to play and run the game, not necessarily have a pristine collection. So the first three books are really the only ones that I would consider to be important or essential to running the original Dungeons & Dragons game. And those are Volume 1, Men and Magic, Volume 2, Monsters and Treasures, and Volume 3, The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. So if you're looking to just run a game, these are really all that you need, along with these things here. You can probably do without the chainmail rulebook, but you really do want at least the reference sheets. So these are the things that I would consider to be essential or the most important for a buyer's guide if you want to play Dungeons & Dragons 0 Edition and have a great time. That said, there were 4 supplements, and I'm not going to get into stuff like this for the other editions. It's just, again, there's so little to this that I may as well just kind of show these off as well. So you've got supplement number 1, Greyhawk, which came out. So this has some rules, I think some setting information on the world of Greyhawk itself. Let's just open up the table of contents here right quick if I can. The pages don't seem to want to cooperate. Alright, so we've got some information there, but again, this isn't really what I would consider to be essential to it. Blackmoor is kind of along similar lines. It's a cool book. Blackmoor is one of the oldest actual established settings in the Dungeons & Dragons brand, but again, it's not something that you really need to run the game. Now, supplement number 3, I'm not going to show the cover of just because it may not be considered appropriate for YouTube, but we've got Eldritch Wizardry. And that just has, I think, some new spells and monsters and things along those lines. And then the last book is Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. But none of those are what I would consider to be essential to running the game. They're great to have if you're collecting, but this video isn't necessarily about collecting. It's about diving in, playing the game, and enjoying it. So for those purposes, I recommend the following. So reference sheets, chainmail, medieval rules for medieval miniatures, Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasures, and The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. So those were the items available for 0 Edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I'm going to be completely and totally honest here. If anybody's looking to go back and experience some of the earliest points in D&D's history, while this is the earliest version of the game, I honestly don't recommend trying to go back and buy these. And the biggest reason is just the costs alone. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the box sets tend to go for well over $1,000, and that's even if the boxes are in pretty rough shape. Even if you want to buy the individual books, however, from the time that I first got these were around $30 a piece on average, what they were being sold for. The prices of these have gone up from around that to sometimes $50 to $80, even $100 a piece. I've seen some of the listings at. Now those are asking prices and not sold prices, but the fact remains that these things are really expensive, and I'm not sure that the gameplay would really hold up in terms of how it would function now. One of the biggest reasons that 0 Edition really did derive from the chainmail miniatures game, and it kind of has some of those sensibilities to it. For example, the book here, Men and Magic, actually says that, a typical referee, because I don't even think the term Dungeon Master was used at this point, but a referee could have up to 20 players in his group, and that just made me cringe. I ran a game with like 9 players in it, and it was brutal to keep track of everything. So imagine trying to do that with up to 20 people. So honestly, like I said, as interesting as this is, I consider this to be more of a serious collector thing than getting together for the enjoyment of the game. That said, there was a reprint of this, I think in 2012 or 13, that had a box, like a wooden box, a set of dice that came with it, and you can generally find those for a lot cheaper. Now, the only thing with those is that the covers were completely redesigned for all of them, and I suspect it had something to do with the fact that Eldritch Wizardry did have a naked woman lying on an altar in the original version, so they probably had to change the cover for that. And not to look so transparent as, we're removing the cover for this reason, they decided to redesign them all. So if you can find ones that have different covers from the ones that I've shown in this video, they should typically be cheaper if they're being sold individually. Again, the box sets for those, if you get them with the wooden box, tend to go for around $200 to $300 from what I've seen. And these, of course, are Canadian prices because that's what I deal with. But again, this version of the game, if you wanted to know what things you could pick up for it, I made it in this video, but honestly I don't recommend it. If you want to go back to some of the earliest days of Dungeons & Dragons, what I do recommend is going through and getting what's referred to as either the BECMI or the Menser D&D, or sometimes just referred to as basic Dungeons & Dragons. This came out in between 0th edition and 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, the reason that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons has the name Advanced is because this version came out prior to it. And it came out as 5 different box sets. You had the basic rules, expert rules, companion rules, expert rules, and the immortal rules. Now, the only ones that I actually have from that set at this point in time are the master rules. Now, these ones actually aren't necessary in order to play an enjoyable game of the Menser version of Dungeons & Dragons. Menser, the last name of one of the individuals who worked on that version of the game. Really, all that you need to get some pretty enjoyable games, and I have a friend who's doing this, is the basic rule set. Now, again, I don't have the basic rules, but I do have Keep on the Borderlands, Adventure B2, which came with the basic rules as part of this set. Now, just as a side note, this is B2. B1 came in a different version of the D&D basic rules back before even this stuff came out, and it was done as an introductory set of rules to the Dungeons & Dragons game. It wasn't its own separate product line like this ended up being, so this is why this is B2, just if you're wondering. So the basic rules are very important. Again, Keep on the Borderlands is one of the most iconic adventures in all of Dungeons & Dragons. Another highly iconic one is the adventure that came with the other set that I recommend you getting, which would be the Expert Rules. And the Expert Rules came with X1, the Isle of Dread. So that's a version, probably the earliest version of the Dungeons & Dragons game that plays more like what you would expect for D&D, a little less like the kind of miniatures game that the original Dungeons & Dragons would have, and more like the role-playing game that we know and love. The Menser D&D is still looked at as one of the most fondly remembered versions of Dungeons & Dragons. So if you're looking to go back to the earlier roots of D&D, that's the one that I recommend, is the Menser rules. Basic and Expert, you can probably do away with the companion rules as well as the master rules. They're not necessary to running some games. And the immortal rules, I would just flat out say you don't need those at all if you're just looking to play the game, because the immortal rule set is something that came out that goes beyond like epic level. It's something that the characters no longer have levels as a structure because they're so powerful. That's not where you really want to start playing this version of the game. So another alternative to buying the individual rule booklets is a product that was released called the Rule Cyclopedia. And the Rule Cyclopedia is a hardcover book that combines the basic rules, expert rules, companion rules, and master rules into one book. Again, not including the immortal rules. So that is something that you can look at. Those books do tend to be kind of expensive too. I've seen prices ranging from $150 to sometimes a little over $200, depending on the condition of the book. So, but that is an option as well. And overall, it may be cheaper trying to find the Rule Cyclopedia than trying to get the other 4 sets of books individually. But that's, again, what I would recommend for the earliest version of Dungeons & Dragons that people should go back and try to play. Alright, so now I want to talk about 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The core books, which I've got here, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual, were released between the years of 1977 and 1979. The Monster Manual was the first book to come out, actually, followed by the Player's Handbook, and finally the Dungeon Master's Guide. First edition AD&D ran until 1989, so depending on how you want to date when first edition started, if you wanted it to be from when the first book in the series came out, or if you wanted it to be from when players were actually finally able to make characters using that rule set, it had an 11 to 12 year run as the the main edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So if you're interested in going back and playing this version of it, this is generally, if you hear somebody talking about AD&D, it's pretty well guaranteed that they're going to be talking about first edition. So these are the core books. These are the ones that you need at bare minimum in order to run a game. So one thing that this buyer's guide is going to have for all the editions is showing off at least the core books, because again, those are pretty essential. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on those because they kind of go without saying. But there are some extra books that you can pick up if you're interested in giving more options, having more different types of encounters, and including things like, adventures or settings. And so we're going to get to all that. First of all, if you want to have a few more options, especially for the player characters, some different classes and races, there is the book Unearthed Arcana. So this one is kind of a, I guess you could say, controversial or polarizing book. A lot of people absolutely loved Unearthed Arcana, thought it was a great addition to the game. Other people were really kind of upset with it and thought that things were a little too powerful. For example, there's like a Cavalier class that I think gives exceptional stats on just about everything. This has the Thief Acrobat, and I want to say there's a Barbarian in here as well. Yeah, there is a Barbarian in here. So this book is, again, very kind of polarizing. If you watch the Dungeons and Dragons Saturday morning cartoon way back in the 80s, the Cavalier, the Thief Acrobat, and the Barbarian were all inspired from this book. So there you go there. Now, if you're looking to have extra monsters, extra things to fight in the game, in addition to the regular monster manual, there is the Fiend Folio and the Monster Manual 2. So the Fiend Folio is probably the more well-remembered of the two. In general, the cover, of course, is pretty iconic, pretty easy to remember with the Githyanki on it. And this introduces things like the Githyanki and the Githzerai. The Monster Manual 2, of course, does have some great monsters in here as well. So let's just see if we can find the alphabetical list right quick here, because I believe that for anyone who's interested in the Tarosk as a monster, I believe this is the book where they first appeared. So I don't know how easily I'm going to be able to find it, but probably not too far off. I just kind of want to show it off. And of course you can see some of the old classic AD&D artwork as well. And there we go. So yeah, this is where the Tarosk first appeared. So again, these are just books for extra monsters, some extra encounters. But let's just say that you're happy with the core books, but you want to have some sort of campaign setting for your first edition AD&D game. The hardcover line did produce 3 such books. We had Oriental Adventures, Greyhawk Adventures, and last but not least, Dragonlance Adventures. So these are all sort of campaign settings. Dragonlance and Greyhawk are probably pretty well known. Oriental Adventures is just that. It's sort of like an Oriental themed setting, so it has things like, ninjas, samurais, monks. It kind of caters to that style of play. So these books are all great. The one thing I will caution is Oriental Adventures has, in all the copies that I've seen, have had issues with the binding and the spines. So for example, and this is only probably about the 4th time I've ever opened this book since I bought it, but I'm just going to flip here, and you can already see that some of the pages have come out. And that's the way that it was when I got it. I think I only paid $10 for this book when I initially got it. But that's just like, so the binding is just really poor with this book. And every copy I've ever seen of this has had that issue. So, if you decide you want to run an Oriental themed adventure and you want to get one of these books, and you're doing it, especially if you're doing it through online sales like eBay or even Amazon or any other sites where you're kind of buying things just based off the pictures, if it's not in the description, please ask and make sure that all the pages are included and some of them haven't fallen out and gotten lost, because there could be crucial information that you're losing there. But first edition AD&D wasn't just about the books or the settings or things like that. What really made first edition AD&D famous was the modules, the adventures. I don't have a lot of first edition AD&D adventures. I've just got a couple examples here that I want to show. The first here is Ravenloft, of course, which was an instant classic. So this came out for the first edition AD&D brand. And then there was a whole slew of Dragonlance adventures. I've got a ton of them, but I'm just going to show this one off here. So this is kind of what you're looking for. A lot of the adventures, especially ones that were released later on, have this orange strip at the top, along with their designation, and it just says Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So if you're wondering what they are, what adventures you have, if they're for first or second edition, if it just says Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, then that's what you're looking at there. Now, one of the things that I will say with going back and getting, before I go any further, going back and getting first edition AD&D is it's not necessarily as difficult as other editions may have been, like the basic rules or zero edition. And the biggest reason for that is in 2011 or 12, I can't remember the exact year right now, but Wizards of the Coast ran a reprint of the 3 core books that were available for sale at local hobby shops or game stores. So they produced quite a few of these. It's not necessarily the largest print run that they've ever done, but they did introduce a new set of these books into the public, so it might be easier to find them. They would have just sort of like brown covers that have like a leather look to them, and a kind of like a picture window in the middle that would have things that resemble the core books. So I think the Player's Handbook would have like the devil face here, or the statue demon face where the gem's being pried. The Monster Manual has like the red dragon, and the Dungeon Master's Guide has like a close-up, I think, of the Afridi face there. So those ones would probably be not necessarily easier to find, but some local bookstores may even still have them sitting in stock if they never sold. The reason I wanted to say that is because in addition to those reprints, they also did Unearthed Arcana. But if you're looking to get adventures for first edition AD&D and finding the originals are hard to do or hard to track down, Wizards of the Coast did release 2 compilations of first edition AD&D adventures. So the first one I want to show here is the Dungeons of Dread. This contains 4 modules. Just a second here, see if I can show the ones that are here. So this includes Tomb of Horrors, the classic, White Plume Mountain, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which introduced the Froghemoth, and the Lost Caverns of Socanth. I don't really know how to pronounce that, but there it is. So these are the ones that come with this original, with this reprint. So you get 4 really classic dungeons, including the one that goes a little bit sci-fi with Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which is pretty cool. And if anybody's ever seen the second Dungeons & Dragons movie, Wrath of the Dragon God, the Barrier Peaks are one of the adventures that's actually referenced, with the barbarian Lux's brother having apparently traveled to the Barrier Peaks and seen something that made him go insane, which was probably everybody's favorite monster, the Froghemoth. Now, in addition to that, there is actually a quest line, or a adventure line, or thread, that they also released called Against the Slave Lords. So this reprints the 4 Slave Lords adventures that came out, which were, I think, all pretty much designed as competitions for conventions and things like that. And there's actually rules in here if you want to score it as if you're running it as a competition. So this has A1, Slave Pits of the Undercity, A2, Secret of the Slaver Stockade, A3, Assault on the area of the Slave Lords, and A4 in the Dungeons of the Slave Lords. But what's also pretty cool about this is it has a A0 introductory chapter, which was written specifically for this book, Danger at Dark Shelf Quarry. So the introductory chapter, A0, is designed to kind of set up the story that runs through the rest of the series. So this is actually pretty cool. These I think they're still available if you live in Canada on Chapters, their website. And I got these for around $30. as opposed to their actual retail price, which I think was closer to $50 or $60. So these should still be decently available if you're looking to go back and buy some stuff for first edition AD&D, as is Unearthed Arcana, and you may have some luck finding the reprints of the first edition AD&D hardcovers as well. So that sums it up, pretty much wraps it up for first edition AD&D. So what we're going to do now is move on to second edition. Alright, so now let's talk about second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It ran from 1989 until about the summer of the year 2000, so it had an 11-year life cycle as well. The first thing I want to say is that there are different versions of the game. So, when it originally came out, the books looked more or less like this. And there's a picture, I don't own the Player's Handbook in this style, unfortunately, but there is a picture in the back of this that I'll show off here in a second. So this is the Dungeon Master's Guide. You can see he's got a wizard battling a red dragon, which looks pretty cool. Also, originally, the monster books came as a monstrous compendiums, and they were basically binders that had come out. Now, as far as if you're looking to pick up and play second edition AD&D, I don't recommend going for these because I think these are more collectible, so they may end up being a little bit more valuable. Also, all the art's in black and white for the most part. I think all the monsters are. Let's see if I can find some. Yeah, all the monster art is done in black and white as well, so it's not the most visually appealing of the versions. So I would recommend going against that one. They did eventually release a full cover, or not full, full color hardcover, referred to as the Monstrous Manual. So we've got, like I said, we got the Dungeon Master's Guide here. So just in the back, we have, this is what the Player's Handbook looked like. So it's like a fighter. Looks like he's charging. I don't know if he's charging through flames, but he's on horseback with a sword. Looks pretty cool. And then we've got, like I said, this shows the monster manual there. So this was the original design of the books. Now I think it was in 1995, I want to say, 95 or 96, that TSR, the company that created Dungeons & Dragons and owned it at the time, re-released second edition with these black covered books. Now this is the very first role-playing book I ever bought with my own money. So, and it's kind of in rough shape. Unfortunately, some people mistreated it a bit, which is why I'm really particular about how my book's handled now, but that's a whole different thing. But I mean, right here, when this came out, yeah, February 1995, says this is not AD&D 3rd edition. So, they just redesigned it. I guess they revised a few things. This is the version that I played. The other version is similar enough. I don't think the differences are so drastic that you would consider them to be different versions of the game, although some people do refer to this as D&D 2.5. But these are, again, the core books. Now, something about these as well, similar to the first edition AD&D books, these books were actually also reprinted. So they were done in, I think it was in 2013, and they reprinted the second edition books. I have the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, mainly because I never actually owned the black bordered version of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I've always wanted to go through and actually try to compare the differences and just never actually got around to doing it. But these were reprinted. They're still decently available, so you may be able to still find them at bookstores or game stores. And you could probably find these online as well. So these would be, again, you know, an alternative to trying to go back and buy the original. So those are out there as well. Now, one thing I will say, unfortunately, even though second edition is where I first entered the D&D hobby, I don't really own a lot of it. So I'm just going to show off a few things that I do have and kind of talk about the product lines sort of around there. So one of the things that second edition really did is it really produced and pumped out campaign settings. You had your traditional things like, you know, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, as well as like the Forgotten Realms was really popular with second edition. They also introduced a few new settings, like one of the ones was Birthright, I think, where you play Leaders of Kingdoms, and it's a sort of a whole different style of play. Second edition is where Dark Sun was first introduced, as well as the Spelljammer, which is sort of like a spacefaring D&D type of game, so sort of like a sci-fi fantasy blend. And they also introduced probably one of their more famous second edition settings, the setting of Planescape, which kind of takes place as sort of like the city of Sigil is something that's neutral, and most other campaign settings have a way of accessing it. So it's something to kind of add on to existing ones. But the second edition was really campaign setting heavy. So you can definitely find some stuff there. Now, some of the bigger ones, like the Forgotten Realms box set, or Greyhawk, or Dragonlance, even things like Ravenloft, which became a campaign setting in second edition, are going to be probably a little bit more expensive to find, especially since they were also all box sets. I don't think any of them came out just as regular books. Now, there are also a few interesting or quirky settings that they released as well. I had mentioned Birthright and Spelljammer already, but they also did some interesting things like the setting Red Steel, which I've had this for a while, but still really don't know a whole lot about it. I think this took place, I want to say it's either part of Greyhawk or Mystara, but this was like a supplement setting that was added as well. And then there was one of my kind of favorite concepts, the Council of Worms, where you end up playing as dragons. So this was, I know Council of Worms at least, was reprinted and redone to match the style of the black bordered books. So you may be able to find something like this. It's kind of an interesting one. I wouldn't recommend starting off with it, but if you want to go back and do something different with second edition AD&D, this gives you the opportunity and options to play as dragons, which is pretty cool. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in this section of the video is just some of the adventures that were released for second edition AD&D. So there was the Temple of Elemental Evil. They did like a return to the Tomb of Horrors. They reprinted a lot of adventures because the 25th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons occurred during the second edition AD&D run. So you may be able to find some of those. There was, I think, like White Plume Mountain, things along those lines were reprinted as well, as far as adventures go. So that's kind of the only things that I can show off physically, but there are a few more things that I want to talk about. So what we'll do is we'll discuss those next. Alright, so continuing on with some second edition AD&D stuff, one of the first things I actually want to do is I forgot that I actually owned a Silver Anniversary product. So I had mentioned that they did do some reprints for the 25th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons. So this is what they look like, actually. This is what you would kind of see on the cover of these books. This one here is Return to White Plume Mountain. So it's basically, I think this one follows up the original White Plume Mountain, which I have in my AD&D adventure reprints. But if you're wondering what the Silver Anniversary stuff looks like, the products look like, there you go there. Now, the next few things that I want to talk about, like I said, I don't own, so I can't really show them off. But you can probably find them by doing like Google searches or eBay searches or things like that. So the first few things I want to talk about are some kind of like pocketbook-sized supplements that they released. They're around the size of the D&D Essentials books, maybe a little bit smaller, but similar to that. So there were 3 series in general that I want to speak about, just briefly. So there was the Encyclopedia Magica, which I think had 3 or 4 volumes. I'm pretty sure it was 4. And Encyclopedia Magica were those kind of pocketbooks that had magic items in them. So there were 4 altogether. I think they did duplicate ones that were in the Player's Handbooks. Not the Player's Handbook, but the Dungeon Master's Guide. But it's like a comprehensive series with the magic items in there. Along those same lines, there was also the Wizard Spell Compendium, which was 4 volumes as well, which is just a collection of spells taken from all the other products that they've released, all the other campaign settings. And then finally, there was the Priest Spell Compendium, which was 3 volumes, because I think in second edition, Priest spells only went up to 7th level instead of 9th, like they did in later versions of the game. So those were all available as well. Now, those items are on the expensive side, because they are considered to be collectibles as well as just products for the game. So I'm not saying that I necessarily recommend that you get them to play the game, but if you're looking to expand sort of your options, and you can find them at a decent price, certainly, snatch them up. I can't remember what they tend to go for. I think it's around $50 or $60 I've seen some of them listed at. Again, Canadian prices. And the last thing that I want to talk about were a series of alternate rule systems that were released under the Options series. So there was like player's options and there was a DM's options as well. I think DM's option was for high level campaigns. But they were things like, the one that really comes to mind the most is player's options, skills, and powers. I think there were ones for like there like a spell one as well. There were all kinds of different things that they had in there. But these were books that were initially, I think, released as paperbacks, and some of them I think were later redone as hardcovers. Because I remember borrowing Skills and Powers from a friend of mine, and it was a hardcover, but when I've seen them out in the wild, they've always been paperback. Now, I don't own any of them. I'd like to kind of go back and get maybe a couple of them if I can, but I don't have them at this point in time. Now, what they are is, again, they're options. They're optional, so you as the DM have to decide if you want to use them or not. But there's some interesting things in there, and some of what was in those books kind of paved the way for 3rd edition. And a lot of people believe that, or kind of refer to those options books as D&D version 2.75. So they had things like attacks of opportunity and things along those lines in them. The only thing I really remember out of Skills and Powers was a buddy of mine made a unarmed fighter who would like wrestle or punch, and he could do some horrible things with the options in that book. But those are the things for 2nd edition as well that you may want to look at. Again, I wish I had the physical copies of them, but I don't, and I didn't want to try to wait and try to get them to make this video because I may never get around to it. But those are things that are definitely out there for you. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful if you're interested in going back and playing the earlier versions of D&D. Again, it's not my goal in this series to make lists of the rarest or most valuable books. I just want to talk about some things that you can pick up that will help you be able to run adventures and kind of flesh out, you know, your settings or stuff like that for those particular editions. So 0 edition, the Mentor D&D, 1st edition AD&D, and 2nd edition AD&D. Now, hope you enjoy, like I said, and be sure to come back for part 2 of this series, where I'll be discussing D&D 3.0 and 3.5.